Well, hello and welcome. My name is Darrin Patrick.
And I'm Greg Surratt.
And you are listening to our new podcast, The Pastors Collective. On this show, we're going to talk about pastoring in the trenches, the work, the challenges, and the joys of serving churches. You're going to hear from us. You're going to hear from pastors all over the country. And you're going to hear some unfiltered truth about what makes our work as pastors so hard and yet so rewarding.
And Darrin, this week I get to turn the tables on you. On our last episode, you interviewed me, and now I get to do the same for you. There's probably a lot of people that are somewhat familiar with some aspects of your story, but today I'm glad we get to share it in detail.
Now, I've told this story a lot of times. It's hard, but it's really a joy for me to tell, especially because I think it gives hope and courage to many who are struggling.
So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. So Darrin, do you remember the first time we met?
I think so. I believe it was in New York City, and it was the Burning Bush Foundation.
Whoop. You're not supposed to say that. But go ahead and say it. It was a secret back then.
It was a secret. It was. I think you could lose your firstborn if you said that. But it was a secret foundation that funded several of the church planting networks that are still doing great to this day. And I was there with Acts 29. You were there with ARC. We were in awe of Tim Keller's brilliance and kind of felt weird because we were around all these people that we'd read books about and heard about. And I was a young guy, just completely out of place. I don't know why I was in the room, but I do remember that.
Yeah, you guys had been a part of it for a little while, and Billy Hornsby and I got wind of it somehow. You weren't supposed to know, but we got wind and talked our way into the meeting. And it was one of the last ones of that particular group. And yeah, I remember, I didn't know who Tim Keller was. You'd read his books. We hadn't read anything. This guy was amazing. And then the different ones that presented and all of this. And then we had a break for lunch, I think, and you and Mark Driscoll came and sit down at our table. I knew who Mark was, just a little bit, just barely. I remember you, oh man, I'll probably get this wrong, but you said to me, we started to exchange personal information, a phone number, I think. And you were like, so are you ever going to call me? And I'm like, who is this?
No, I said, is this really your number?
Well, maybe that was
because what had happened was multiple pastors I'd met over and they would give me their number, quote, but it wasn't their number. It was their So what I was asking is, are you really wanting to be my friend? Are you really interested in me? Or are you just kind of, am I going to get your secretary?
So you heard it, or you said it as, do you want to be my friend?
Yeah.
I heard it as, who is this arrogant, whatever. Yeah, exactly. And then, but then we connected a few more times over the years. We'd connect at a leadership network thing or whatever, and found out we actually kind of liked each other.
Yeah. And I mean, you had me to preach at Seacoast. I had you at The Journey. We were doing some different things with ARC and Acts 29, trying to figure out in the early days, how do you lead all that? Yeah, and I would call you the multi-site thing. We started doing that, and we keep up with each other. And yeah, it was just it wasn't like constant, but it was. Right. I would say it was consistent.
I'm so grateful, and I tell other people about this I'll give LeadNet a little plug here. But because of our friends at Leadership Network, organizations like Acts 29, ARC, New Thing Network with the Fergusons, Stadia, the various church planting organizations, it didn't feel like we were in competition. We were friends.
Yep.
Learning this whole thing together. We each had kind of a different focus, a different flow, but we became friends through the process. So a few years later, I was in Tokyo. I was actually speaking at a church in Tokyo, and I got a phone call. Tell me about that phone call.
My elders had just confronted me about, sin in my life, specifically an emotional affair that had developed with a lady in the church. Well, she was kind of in the church, kind of outside the church, but unhealthy. And she had talked to the elders, and they confronted me about that and several other just leadership sins, personal integrity issues, all kinds of just stuff that had been building for years. And I was just absolutely frightened because I felt like my whole life was coming apart. And you were one of the first people that I thought of. And so I called, and, it was like, I remember because it was that weird ring, like sometimes when you call, whatever that is. And I'm like, so I don't even know if I got you or you called me back. I can't even remember, but I don't even know what I told you. Do you remember what I told you?
I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember it was crisis time.
Yeah.
You told me at that point, I think you had been confronted specifically with the emotional affair, and the leadership stuff, all that came a little bit later. And it was like, what do I do? And kind of one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just a absolute, trauma crisis. It was so hard for me because I'd poured my life into this church, and we'd had all kinds of drama with Acts 29. So it was just a hard season, period. And to hear the pain from the elders that I had not loved well and invested in, and to sit across the table and them say, "We don't trust you. We don't. It was just I still don't even know what I'm talking about. It's just so painful to see that. And then, they said, "Hey, let's do this. We love you and your family. We want to help you." And they were just super generous and said, "We want to figure out how to do a restoration thing." And I think and then I got to pick a couple pastors to be on that, or I think it was three of you and Scott Sauls and Matt Carter, and then they had a team of people, along with some counselors, and so brought you into that team that met for, I think, 15 months. The first round. Yeah.
Let's kind of go back. So you've got this confrontation. Now, we won't go through all of the details of how that happened. I know you've talked about that at length. And by the way, I am so grateful to you and proud of you for just exposing this raw, sometimes awful piece of your life, because I think it's been very, very helpful to just a lot of people. There's not a lot of folks that do that. It's like, okay, something happened, let's move on.
Yeah.
And what I see in that oftentimes is, first of all, we don't get the benefit of hearing the kind of the real story, the inside story, so that it can help us. And then here's what I often see is I see that there's a difference between brokenness and woundedness. Brokenness is a place where we can minister from, and I think it's a place where you got to. Woundedness are just the wounds that we have, and when we are wounded by life or we wound other people and we don't move into the broken area and kind of put it back together, then we just continue to minister out of woundedness rather than brokenness. A wounded person wounds others.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say thank you for being open to walking through a process.
Yeah. Well, I felt like the Lord told me to do it. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to quit many times. No process is perfect. I remember God speaking to me, and it was probably one of the hardest words I've ever heard, where, just like you feel like the Lord put some in your heart, and it was, "I am perfecting you through this imperfect process."
Mm-hmm. And it was imperfect. There were some great things about it. There are some things that I learned there in that process that unfortunately we'll be able to use for other people in the future, fortunately and unfortunately, because, we're humans and this happens. And there were some wonderful things. But there were some times in the process where I said to my wife, if this was my son, I would pull him out of the process because it's brutal.
Yeah.
And we were all just kind of learning, I think, in a sense. But you were a constant. You were, and basically, I think you had a word from God that this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. And, it was just super painful. I think altogether, a couple 100 hours of counseling over the period, and just seeing how I'd operated out of deception. And, there's a fine line between deception and persuasion, and I had crossed that line, shrewdness versus innocence, and all those kind of polarities we see even in Scripture, obviously. But I had leaned so far on the rules don't apply to me. I'm entitled. I'd gone from this kid who couldn't believe that he got to plant a church to grateful to serve, to expecting other people to serve me and exist for me. Very subtle, but, very clear. And it took me a long time to see that. I mean, I remember, one of the meetings, we would gather. It was just like, 3 or 4 older pastors, including you, just said, Darrin, you don't see this. We're going to say it again. And then you even pulled me. There was a smaller group that met. I think it was Matt Carter.
Matt Carter.
Yeah.
And we were there to beat you up to make sure that you saw it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's embarrassing and also scary, because I'm sure that's still true. I mean, there's things I don't see, but the process helped me see that. And probably along with the counseling that we received from Rick Pierce and Rich Plass and Jim Cofield with Crosspoint Ministries, just amazing and life-changing. And they're still our counselors to this day, and just amazing. But probably the best part of the process for me, other than you coming in, and we can talk about that, kind of the second part, but was essentially having to face people that I'd hurt and wounded. I remember when they told me that, they said, hey, here's what we'd like to do. Anybody that's felt like they've been wounded, ex-staff, ex-elder, church member, can set an appointment with you. And they're like, and here's what you do. You sit there and you listen. And you don't defend yourself.
I bet that was a lot of fun.
The first day I had 3, and I'd already confessed to all the staff, and then the campus pastors, different tiers of elders. I think we had 50 elders, and basically had done that with them in a bigger group, in different sizes. One was 20 and one was 50. But anyway, so I'd done that in a bigger group, but like sitting across the table, like we're sitting across the table right now. And the first day, I think I had 3 people. And the first one was like, yeah, Darrin, I just kind of felt like, under your leadership, man, I don't know, you're real nice and friendly, but I kind of felt used. Second person, like, yeah, love hanging out, and you're really funny. And I don't know, I just kind of felt like a pawn, like you're playing this big chess game and I'm one of the pawns. And the third one was like, yeah, I don't know, it just didn't feel real. Didn't feel like you really liked me. You liked what I did. And I remember going home to my wife. She's like, how'd it go? And I'm like, well, these people are so sensitive. I mean, this is just, wow, that, they need to grow up, and what do they think leadership's about? And then the second day, the first person was like, hey, I just kind of felt used, felt like a pawn. The next person said, yeah, I just kind of felt like you didn't really care. I'm like, oh my gosh. It was like having to face that and see that was true about me, and being totally oblivious. That was the hardest part, is understanding how long I'd been operating without very much self-awareness, not understanding my impact on other people, my effect on other people. Meanwhile, I'm thinking I'm this great leader, and just kind of seeing that I wasn't was just, it was depressing. I'm like, was anything I did real? Is this all, am I just a terrible person? Do I belong in ministry? All those questions.
One of the eye-opening days to me was when you sat down. I don't know, I can't remember where we were, but we were meeting as a group, and you began to talk a little bit about your relationship with your father. How did that play in this whole process, and maybe making you the man that you are?
Yeah. Well, my dad was a blue-collar guy, put on your own roof, change your own oil. That guy I think he graduated 10th grade, maybe, but went into business, was an excavator, house builder, rough guy, was abused by his parents. I found out one night he had a little bit too much to drink, and confided in some stuff when I was in college that I didn't know anything about. I knew there was brokenness there. But yeah, he did not know I say it this way. My dad did the best he could with the tools he had. He just didn't have a lot of tools. And so, we grew up in a home of a lot of violence, a lot of yelling, a lot of, stuff like that. And yeah, I just forgave my dad. Felt like I, as I became a Christian in high school, felt like I, kind of pursued him. And I'd written books about this stuff, Pastor Greg, like deal with your father wound and preach sermons on it and all this stuff. And well, he got sick and I became his primary caregiver for the last few months of his life. And this is right before the emotional affair started, 4 months before, but he died. And it was in June of 2015, and something broke in me. And I don't totally understand. I did his funeral and felt good about it, but it was just like, I don't quite know. And I've heard other people say this, that happens when your dad dies. Like you kind of got stuff pushed down and contained, and you've thought you've answered these questions. And then all of a sudden, and right then I should have called timeout and said to the elders, I need a 6-month sabbatical at least. But I didn't do it because we were having all this conflict, mostly because of my lack of good leadership. And I was afraid that I was going to lose power. So I didn't pay attention to my soul and just kind of pushed through. And then that's when all the wheels came off. So I think deeply impactful. And I learned so many good things from my dad. He was the hardest working man I've ever met. But, just a lot of wounds there that I thought were healed that actually weren't.
You told a story one time, and I don't know if I remember it properly, but how he kind of pushed you away when you were just a little guy. And maybe it was because of the way that your mom was relating to you. Or do you know the story I'm talking about, or am I making one up right here?
So I had 2 older sisters, which means I have 3 moms, right? So, yeah. And my dad would, and now I see it in my own son. I've got 1 son and 3 daughters, so I'm living this world again. But he would try to correct me. He'd come home from work, and I'm playing with my food. I'm not eating it. I'm not taking the trash out right. So he's always like in correction mode. And the girls are like, they would get on to him about that. Like, talk to him about his day. Don't just come and correct him. And my dad said that same conversation when he told me about his, abuse in college. He literally said this. He said, one day, your mom and your sisters got on to me. He goes, and you were probably 6. And he said, in my heart, I just said, fine, you raise him. Mm. And he said, that's exactly what he said. And then he just stopped. And I'm just like, I remember. I don't remember him. He didn't say anything, but I remember the distance. And so he never came to I was an athlete, never came to my baseball games, football games, basketball games. So yeah, just like, in that moment, like, wow. Like, because I didn't eat my green beans. I think that was the issue there. It's like I didn't eat the green beans. So, but yeah, I think that had consequences, obviously, on the kind of man I became and the kind of wounds that were revealed. And I say it this way, like, my dad's, abuse and death didn't cause any of this. It exposed it. Mm-hmm. So this isn't it. You're not blaming him
at all. No, but it exposed some of what where your heart was. I remember, I think I was speaking for Chad Blansett in Springfield, Missouri, and you were at an exceptionally low period of your life. And shame and guilt. You've built this church, and now everywhere you go in St. Louis, you were a chaplain for the Cardinals. Yeah. There's just all of this going on. And I don't remember if I called you or you called me. And I said, let's have breakfast. So I drove up from St. Louis, or I drove from, I think you said, are you in town? And I said, yes, I'm in town. Wasn't exactly true. I was close to town.
Yeah, 3.5 hours.
Yeah, well, and drove up and had breakfast, and you needed anybody.
Yeah.
You needed a dad. And you're too old to be my son, and I know that there are other men that have spoken into your lives, but it was probably more so at that breakfast that I could sense God saying, he needs more out of you than just to be a part of his team.
Yeah.
He needs a dad to speak into him, say, you're okay. I'm proud of you.
Yeah. That was, I'd never had anybody do that for me before, inconvenience themselves like that. Just from you literally drove 3 hours. We had a 2 hour whatever, and then you drove back 3.
Well, what else are you going to do in Springfield, Missouri, for goodness sake? You know,
It's true.
I had some open time, so
It's
let's
true.
not make me more of a hero than I am.
But it was a game changer for me, because it just made me go, okay, you can trust an older pastor, and really you can trust an older man. And I think probably that was the first time I ever thought that could be true.
So you go through this process, and you're crying right now. People can't see that, but here goes. That's a nose blow that you're hearing right now. But we shed a lot of tears in this process together. You go through the process. Was there ever a time when you wondered, God will never use me again?
Oh yeah, I didn't want to be after all this happened. I'm like, I don't ever want to do this again. Part of it was shame, and part of it was just, I don't trust myself. If I can be that deceived about my effect on people, I don't ever want to do this again. I can't be trusted, But the Lord just kept, confirming, no, you're supposed to. I didn't know what, I still, I quite honestly don't know exactly what I'm called to do. I know I'm called to serve. Yeah. So I think, it was, what'd you say? I can't remember what the question was.
I wondered if you felt like maybe I've blown it so bad, or I am in such a place that how can God ever use me again?
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the feeling of like, you've blown it, and, it will never, what's so hard when you feel called to something, but then you don't think you can ever do it again. So like the rest of my life, I got to live with this outside of my passion and outside, and I've just brutal.
So how was Amy in this process?
She, she was we, by the grace of God, one of the things that happened in the process was they took all my hard drives for, I think it was 8 years. And then all the text messages, every single, device that I'd had, they had an ex-FBI forensic guy, sweep that and do that. Because what was said to you, do you remember what was said?
Yeah. One of the guys said, listen, this is early on in the thing, and said, listen, we've done this a lot, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Usually there will probably be affairs. There will probably be, this is just kind of what he got caught at.
Yeah. And so, they took the computers, and it was like 4 months.
Yeah.
After I confessed the emotional affair, my wife, the first 2 weeks, every day she would get up, I would get up, and she would be standing there at the bed, and she would have a list of numbers. I saw this on your phone. Who is this? And who is this? And she made me go through and this was probably 8 days, I think. And that was hard, but it was her trying to trust me and trying to find out, is this, have you been cheating on me? Have you been, is this a pattern? And so, you fast forward 4 months, and what do I get a call? Hey, we got all your stuff back. And the guy's like, you've had some trouble with pornography. I'm like, yeah, which I had hid. And that the hardest part of this process is you don't know, like part of it, you're lying and you know it, and you think you can. And then part of it is you don't even know, like you don't even remember. It doesn't even feel like you chose it, although you did, but it just became such a part of you, some of the deception and some of the, so I knew the pornography thing. I'm like, yeah, I knew that. It was on my phone, but I had weird legalisms. So I would watch pornography some on my phone, but not on my computer, because that's where I worked on sermons, or not on my iPad, because that's where I read books. But in my head,
right,
I made those kind of weird
compartments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but they got the computers back, and they're like, there's nothing on there. And I remember telling my wife, and she was like, I knew there would be nothing on there. And it was like, oh, man. You know, she believed in me, even though all the evidence and all our whole life's fallen apart. And she was like, I knew you were faithful. I knew you had some issues, but
How important was that to you?
Oh, it was like, I think at that point, that was one of the turning points for me to go. Because the other piece of the last question was, you know, I might want to do ministry again. I'm not sure my girl wants to do it again, you know? And so at that point, I thought, okay, we're going to be okay. And maybe God could use us again together. You know,
The whole process was difficult on her too, though.
it was horrible. Yeah. It was hard because, you know, I think in these situations, I mean, she's the victim,
Yep.
but she's associated with the guilty. You know, she's married to the guilty. And so I think it's hard for people who do those processes to kind of differentiate that and not just make her a part, you know, of the problem, so to speak. And so I think there was a struggle there just process wise. But then, like, you know, we built this whole thing. I mean, she didn't want to plant a church. I mean, she cried the first 6 months we were in St. Louis. I mean, the Lord won her heart, but this wasn't her dream as much as it was my dream.
Right.
And so now we live for, so to speak, my dream, and look at where it's gotten us. And you know, you feel betrayed, you feel, you know, neglected, all those kind of things yeah. So it was really.
She had to process anger.
Oh, at me. Yeah.
Yeah. And process it with a counselor. I know I spoke with both of you several times, and I'm not a counselor.
Yeah.
But
But you do play one on the phone.
you do, yeah, you do the best you can. Okay, you do the best you can, and there was you know, so much anger, which is normal. And how do you process that? What do you do? But and hopefully Amy will listen to this. She's a hero in this deal.
Oh, there's no question.
Dealing with anger, dealing with dealing with feeling like just a whole lot of emotions, and yet she was a rock.
Yeah.
In the midst of it.
And I think, you know, we've done all this work around the Enneagram with, you know, Rich and Jim with the Cross Point Ministry guys. And, you know, her style of with anger, with her specific, you know, Enneagram style is to repress it. And so she did not realize how angry she was. Mm-hmm. And so one of the gifts of this whole thing was her being able to, like, actually go, oh, because for her to be angry is to be wrong. That's sin. Mm-hmm. And she was able to see, no, it's not always sin. And actually, it's healthy to deal with your anger. You don't. And so that's one of the, it's transformed our marriage in tons of ways, but really around the issue of anger, because I'm an explode guy, and then we're done, right? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, people are laying on the floor with shrapnel in them, you know, and I'm like, what? We're good.
We're good. Let's go get something to drink.
So that one area of, like, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the emotion of anger, and repent of the sin of anger, because emotion's a sin, and it's an emotion, both. You got to differentiate those. That has changed our marriage in ways that, and honestly, like, I looked at her, I've been saying this to her, I think we're in the best place we've ever been. We've been married 25 years. I think we are in the best place we have ever been. There's a depth to our marriage that was just, I don't think it was possible without this. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I look at just the fruit of that along with our family. We'd become business partners. We had lost just passion for connecting in every way, physically, emotionally, and it just, like, you got 4 kids, you got a big church, you got a church planning network, you've written books, you're doing all this conference stuff, and we just gotten lost. And this whole experience helped us kind of find each other again.
So would you say right now you're at a better place, good place?
Oh yeah. I mean, than ever. Yeah. Yeah. There's no question. I mean,
so what would you say to somebody who they're hiding and they don't know what to do? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, number one, the truth is, I mean, Jesus says this, and, you know, the Bible is replete with, you know, your sin will find you out. Whatever's in the dark will be brought into light. It just will. It just will. Mm-hmm. So just know that. And then know that you don't have to pretend to be farther along than you are, because God loves you right where you are. And you're loved in your brokenness. You're loved in your sin. And find some people that you can talk to about that, whether that's a professional counselor, a spiritual father or mother, and then start addressing your wounds. Like, start realizing that your behavior is coming from somewhere. The fruit, there's a root. Start trying to figure that out with your counselors, with your pastors, with your friends, and then just pay attention. The self-awareness thing, start asking people, how do you experience me? Like, when my name comes up on your phone and you look at it, what emotion goes through your heart? Start being curious. For me, like, I wish I could have. Here's the deal: when you're a pastor, you're the dad of the church, and you can gripe about that. You can try to like dodge that. The truth is, you are. So people are going to, if your buddy hurts you, it hurts. If your brother hurts you, it hurts a little. But if your dad hurts you, you never forget it. Mm-hmm. You never, ever forget it. And so as a pastor, it is a weighty thing. And when we're fathers and mothers of churches, we're going to hurt people. And so what I would say is, where you've hurt people, do everything you can to sit down with them in an environment that's safe for them, which might mean there may need to be other people there because they don't trust, and listen and learn. And I wish I would have did that instead of saying, oh, they're weak, or they're not executive level, or, they need counts. I mean, these are all the things I would say about people. A lot of it true, but what I should have done was listen and put myself in environments where I wasn't trying to control the narrative of the conversation, and just listen.
Are you hopeful about the future?
I am. I don't know what it is. I mean, I know the Lord. I mean, I felt like, I was called to serve you in Seacoast, and that's what I know. And I'm doing it. I'm getting, Amy and I are doing speaking and encouraging stuff around what we've learned and what God's grown in us through this process. And so we're glad to do that. But yeah, I am. I'm hopeful. And I think what we said last time about the whole sage thing, I mean, I'm a little young for that, but I feel like, that's me. Like I'm not as interested in mountains anymore for myself. I really am going, okay, how can we help the next generation?
Yeah.
The fatherless generation. What does that look like? And so I'm excited about that.
Well, as we think about this stage, and you're not too young, in fact, I'm looking at you right now, and you're looking a little haggard.
Yeah.
I think you're getting prepared for this father thing.
Yeah.
But, we still have energy. We still have drive. We still have ambition. What's exciting is, if you buy into the 6 levels of a man's life, what are they? They're the adolescent male, some people call it the cowboy, where you're, get your first car, first date, all of that. You're the warrior, where you take care of yourself, and you are under the service of a king. There's a king that has a kingdom, and the sage maybe doesn't even necessarily have his own kingdom anymore, but he's the advisor to many kings. And in that sense, we're able to speak into a generation that desperately needs what we have. And that's not an arrogant thing. That's just a fact thing. And Darrin, I am more than grateful, more than glad that you stuck with the process, because I think yours is a voice of one who was wounded, who became broken, and who now sees hope on the other side. Yours is a voice that is encouraging to a lot of people that are listening to us right now, but you're also a voice, you've been there, and you can help. So hopefully, even in this podcast that we do and we're not just going to talk about these stories, we'll talk about some of these stories, we'll talk about everything, life. And I think in that, your life, and what Rick Warren said, I think Rick Warren said it. Rick Warren told me one time, he said, when you're quoting somebody, the first time you say, well, Rick Warren said, the second time you said, somebody said, and the third time you use it, you just say, the other day I was thinking. I think it was Rick Warren, at least it stuck in my mind, who said, God never wastes a hurt. And God hasn't wasted this hurt in you. And I think you're going to be a help and encouragement to just a lot of people.
Amen.
If you're enjoying our show, please subscribe today and give it a rating and a review in iTunes or wherever you're listening. It helps other people find the show. The Pastors Collective is a production of Seacoast Church and Narrativo. It was produced by Mike Cosper. It was edited by Quinette Connor. It was mixed by TJ Hester. Our music is by Dan Phelps. The Pastors Collective is executive produced by Greg Surratt and Darrin Patrick. You can learn more about our show and find transcripts at www.pastors-collective.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.